My son-in-law said it only took a signature, $50,000. Old man, what do you need it for? But when I refused, he didn't get angry. He smiled and left me at the train station, alone, in the middle of the night, without a dime. He thought I was weak, easy to manipulate. He had no idea who I really was. I stood frozen under the dim, flickering lights of the platform. My luggage? Just a worn-out duffel with a few clothes. My phone? Accidentally left in the car. Wallet? Missing. I could hear the wheels of his car rolling away down the street, growing faint. David had left. No goodbye. No hesitation. He didn't pass up the chance to turn me into a helpless old man, abandoned, penniless, and stranded. I stood there for what felt like hours. A cold wind crept through my thin shirt, chilling me to the bone. But the cold inside me went deeper. It wasn't the air that made me numb. It was the realization that hit me like a hammer. The man my daughter calls her husband, the same man who once bowed and begged for money from me when they first married, had just dumped me in a strange city because I refused to hand over money he thought he deserved. $5,000. To David, that was the price. He thought I was just another pushover, an old man who'd cave with a little pressure, a walking ATM. But what David didn't know, what he could never imagine, was that behind my faded clothes, my beat-up bicycle, and my plain old checking account was the man who owns over $200 million in Long Enterprises, a company I built from nothing, a fortune I hid for a reason. I lived simply not because I had to, but because I chose to. I wanted to see who truly cared, who loved me for me, not for the size of my wallet. My daughter, Sarah, used to be the only light in my world. But since she married David, I've slowly been pushed to the sidelines. From being left out of family dinners, to unanswered messages, to passive-aggressive comments like, "Dad, you really need to let us live our own lives." I kept quiet, told myself she needed to figure things out, that I shouldn't interfere. But tonight, I'm not sure I can keep doing that. David played a dangerous and stupid game. He saw me as a discarded piece on a chessboard. But what he didn't know was that I've used this silence before to steer my company through 3 economic crashes, 2 hostile takeovers, and 1 international lawsuit. I'm not the kind of man who gets pushed aside with empty hands. I sat down on the icy metal bench at the station, closed my eyes. Memories came rushing back: boardrooms, tough calls, contracts I signed under silent shell corporations, secret trusts I set up for Sarah, for her future. I kept it hidden so she'd be protected, so no one could use her, especially not a man like David. But the worst part wasn't what David did. It was what Sarah didn't do. She knew he wanted money. She knew I wasn't as broke as I looked. But she didn't stop him. She didn't call to check on me. Didn't text. Didn't ask if I was okay. She stayed silent. In that moment, I realized something painful. I wasn't just betrayed by David. I had been abandoned by my own daughter, not just at the train station. But in her heart, I was no longer her father. I clenched my fists not in anger, but from the sharp, bitter ache in my throat. That choking kind of pain that has no words. I didn't want revenge. I wasn't here to make anyone suffer. But I also couldn't let the truth stay buried. Because the truth is, I've seen what David is doing. And I won't stay silent any longer. I didn't know where the next train would take me. But I knew one thing. I was done playing the quiet, forgotten old man. I stood up and reached into the inner pocket of my jacket. I pulled out a small card, Rosa Martinez, my former assistant. the only person I still trusted. She once told me, "If you ever need me, just call." Tonight, I would call. And by morning, David would start to understand the magnitude of the mistake he just made. I began walking along the empty sidewalk, my old shoes echoing a steady clunk on the cold pavement. I didn't know where I was going, but my mind was heading backwards back to the past, to moments I once thought were random, ordinary, harmless. But now, they're no longer ordinary. I remember the first time I met David, a tall young man, charming smile, confident eyes. That night, he shook my hand and called me sir with a respectful tone. I still remember the light in Sarah's eyes. She told me, "He loves me, Dad." And I trust him. Back then, I wanted to believe too. But now the little things, have returned and become as clear as commandments. David never asked anything about me. He never truly sat down to talk to me like a son-in-law should with his father-in-law. Every meeting quickly ended with an excuse like, "I have a meeting," or urgent emails to reply to. He tried to appear busy, successful, important, but, in truth, he was avoiding me. Then came the faint midnight calls, the unexpected charges on Sarah's card, the time Sarah had to borrow a few $1,000s, saying, "David will pay it back later." At the time, I thought they're just a young couple, still figuring out their finances. I didn't want to be the old man who meddled too much. But tonight felt like a punch in the face. I couldn't pretend anymore. I started questioning everything. The business trips where Sarah couldn't come. The times David used new investment opportunities to get me to contribute money. The time he asked me to transfer the full $5,000 from my savings account into a shady digital wallet. Even the house Sarah was living in, I just found out it's owned by an LLC completely unrelated to her. Everything started to link together. And it pointed to one thing: a plan, carefully crafted with a primary motive. David wasn't accidental. He was calculated from the start. He didn't marry Sarah for love alone. He chose her and me as stepping stones, as financial cover. And the way he controls everything now terrifies me. I remember it vividly. Sarah once came to my house, pale-faced, dark circles under her eyes from lack of sleep. She said she wasn't feeling well, but when I offered to take her to the doctor, she instantly refused. "David doesn't want you going to the hospital. He says it's just minor stress, nothing to worry about." I saw it in her eyes. A hesitation, a fear of being caught expressing something wrong. But then she quietly got up and left. And I didn't stop her. I let her walk back into the shadows of her own life. Now I sit here, in the dashes of a city I don't recognize, feeling like I've failed. David didn't just insult me. He exposed my blind spots, my failure to protect my daughter sooner. I started to feel anger, not the kind that erupts, but the silent kind. The anger that simmers in your bloodstream. The kind that fathers reserve for when they realize they haven't been the shield their daughter needed. David once called me a useless old man. He thought my only worth was the $50 in my savings account. He thought a few manipulative words could pressure me into signing the transfer like some fool. But he was wrong. I'm not just a man. I'm a man with memory. And now, I remember everything. I remember Sarah once said, "I love you, Dad, because you always quietly do the right thing." I remember the nights I stayed up at my desk, liquidating assets, setting up anonymous trust signals to shield Sarah's portion from risk. I remember gently warning her, telling her not to give David full control over the finances. She cried, told me I didn't trust her, and I stepped back, and that was the mistake. That mistake allowed Sarah to now live like a stranger, silent, dimmed, like a shadow in her own life. I'm not just angry. I'm heartbroken. It hurts to think that Sarah is living in a golden cage, not bars of iron, but walls built with sweet words, gentle control. She's isolated, convinced that the outside world is dangerous and that only David can take care of her. That's no longer a marriage. That's a prison. And I know if I don't act, one day I'll read my daughter's name in a legal report. A clumsy fraud case. A sudden accidental death. A coincidental tragedy. I cannot let that happen. I open my wallet, look at the old photo of Sarah at 9 years old, wearing a white dress, holding the teddy bear I gave her. That smile was once the light of my life. I know that girl is still in there somewhere, hidden behind the darkness David has built. And I will be the one to clear that darkness. Not with guns, not with shouting, but with documents, with the law, with truth. I am Sarah's father. And this time, I won't take a single slow step again. The sky was beginning to lighten as I arrived at a small cafe tucked deep within the old neighborhood. The place was quiet, with only a few street cleaners stopping by for a takeaway. I chose a corner table, facing the wall, ordered a black coffee, sat in silence, thinking, rebuilding. Like a soldier preparing for battle, I couldn't afford to rush. But inside, I was burning. The simmering anger in my heart had transformed into something else, a steely resolve. Last night, I was left behind like a worthless man. No money, no means, no one by my side. But this morning, I was someone else. Not because I had wealth, but because I had finally understood I could no longer stand on the sidelines. I could no longer be the silent father, watching life pass by from the edge of my daughter's world. David Richardson had gone too far, and I had slept for too long. But the lion was now awake. I stepped outside and found a payphone behind the cafe. It was old, rusted, barely hanging on, much like the mask David wore when he smiled at me. I pulled out an old card from my wallet, Rosa Martinez, my former assistant. More than that, a friend. Someone who had once kept my empire together through recessions, lawsuits, and corporate raids. Rosa, it's me. I need to see you. This morning. There was no hesitation in her voice. I'm at the old office. I'll be there in 20 minutes. No questions. No need for context. Just trust. The kind built not with words, but with years of shared storms. I hadn't returned to that office in years. It sat above an old bookstore downtown. Dusty, but familiar. Still smelled faintly of leather binders and black coffee. Rosa greeted me with a firm hug. You don't look like a man who just got abandoned, she said, half joking. You look like you're going to war. I sat down, my voice calm but unwavering. I am, but not for money, not for business, for my daughter. I told her everything: David's manipulation, the threats, the night at the train station, and worst of all, the silence from Sarah that hurt more than anything. Her expression hardened. I always had a bad feeling about him. He looks at people like assets, not humans. I placed my hand flat on the table. I need your help. This time, we're not fighting for quarterly returns. We're fighting for someone's soul. We divided tasks. Rosa would investigate David, his finances, business holdings, any shell companies he might be using to siphon money. I would pull every record I had on the trust I built for Sarah. A trust designed to safeguard her future. A trust David had somehow discovered and corrupted. I also contacted Marcus Chen, my former legal advisor. Brilliant, sharp, discreet. The kind of lawyer you call when you need to build a case in the dark. "If you're calling," he said, "I assume this is more than family drama." "It is," I replied. "We may be looking at financial abuse, fraud, and something worse." He promised to start legal preparations, immediately freezing assets, requesting emergency protective orders, and quietly initiating inquiries into David's business dealings. The next 72 hours were a storm. Rosa barely slept. Neither did I. What we found was worse than I imagined. David wasn't just hiding funds. He was running a whole shadow economy. 6 shell companies, all with matching office addresses, no real employees, and suspicious deposits. Tracing the bank transfers led us to something horrifying. Almost $430, $1,000 had been siphoned from the Sarah Long Family Trust over the past 2 years. Small withdrawals, frequent, buried in noise, but it was clear. He had access. And worse, Sarah was the one who had unknowingly granted it. Rosa handed me the final folder, face pale. "I don't think you're ready for this." I took it anyway. And there it was, a life insurance policy. Primary insured. Sarah Long. Beneficiary. David Richardson. I froze. My fingertips went numb. This wasn't just about money anymore. This was about survival. That night, I sat alone in my apartment, the one David mocked, the one Sarah never visited anymore. I stared at a photo of Sarah at age 5, in a pink dress, hugging a stuffed bear, smiling like the world was made of candy and cartoons. She used to be so full of life. Now, she looked tired, pale, lost. I remembered her once saying, "I don't feel like myself anymore." I thought she meant stress, life, work. I didn't know she meant she was being erased. I clenched my fist. For the first time in years, I felt like my heart was going to rip open, not from age, but from failure. I was supposed to protect her. And I let this happen. So I made a plan. Freeze all trust assets immediately. Transfer temporary control under legal provision. Hire a discreet security team to monitor Sarah from a distance. No contact, just safety. Begin digital surveillance on David. Track his movements. Monitor financial behavior. Forward evidence to Marcus, who would submit findings to the Financial Crimes Unit. Begin preparing for a direct confrontation. Not physical, but legal. Relentless. Public, if necessary. Everything I did had to be quiet and exact. If David suspected anything, he'd tighten his grip on Sarah, and she would pay the price. I couldn't risk that. And so, I moved like I used to move in the boardroom, silently, smartly, one step at a time. But inside, I burned. This wasn't just about justice anymore. This was about a father's reckoning. I remembered one night when Sarah was 10. She came home crying because kids at school mocked her for not having a mom and for our old car. That night, she curled into my lap and said, "I don't need a mom, Daddy. I have you." I thought love was enough, that if I stayed nearby, she'd be safe. But I was wrong. Love without action is just a wish. Love without protection is just noise. Now, I was ready to protect her. For real. On the 4th morning, I stood before the mirror, wore my old navy blue suit, brushed my thinning hair, fastened my cufflinks, then clipped on the gold lion pin I used to wear as CEO. The lion doesn't need to roar to prove he's king. He only needs to rise. And I had risen. The lion does not announce the hunt. It watches. It waits. It moves when the prey thinks it's safest. That morning, wearing my old navy blue suit and the lion pin, I didn't feel old. I didn't feel abandoned or betrayed. I felt ready. Like every wound, every silence, every missed dinner or unanswered call had led me to this moment. And I knew. David would never see it coming. Evans. The first step was paper. Legal paper. Marcus filed the injunction at 7:03 a.m. It froze the Sarah Long family trust. No further withdrawals. No access. No warning. By 9:12 a.m. the bank's compliance officer confirmed the account had been secured. All linked accounts to the 6 shell companies under David's influence were locked pending investigation. No alarms were triggered. No letters sent. We made sure of that. David was still asleep in his king-size bed, perhaps dreaming of his next investment, completely unaware the faucet had been shut. Rosa, with her network of quiet but loyal contacts, secured a discreet surveillance team. One tail for David, one protective shadow for Sarah. They worked in silence. David's daily routine was noted down to the minute. Gym at 8:00. Calls in the car. Lunch with investors. Stops at luxury boutiques, all funded. We now knew, by my daughter's trust. Sarah, on the other hand, moved differently. Slower. Her eyes always scanning. She looked tired. Empty. She rarely left the house without David. And when she did, her phone was always on speaker. Controlled. The reports were hard to read. Harder to accept. But necessary. By the end of the week, I had everything I needed. Evidence. Documents. Wire transfers. Statements. Photos. Insurance policies. And more importantly, the pattern. A trail of coercion and control, all pointing to David as the orchestrator. Still, I didn't move in anger. This was never about rage. This was about justice. The confrontation was quiet, not the dramatic courtroom kind. No shouting, no chaos. I didn't want revenge. I wanted to strip that man of every ounce of power he had, without him even realizing how it happened. The day David received the subpoena from the Financial Investigation Bureau, I imagined the expression on his face. Confusion, fear, and finally the realization that he had severely underestimated the quiet old man who used to sit silently at the end of the dinner table. When he arrived at the legal meeting summoned by my lawyer, I was already there. Seated, calm, with Marcus by my side and a federal investigator in plain clothes. Spread out across the table was everything. Fraudulent transfers, call recordings, screenshots of messages, and the life insurance policy he'd taken out in Sarah's name with himself as the beneficiary. David went pale. I didn't say much. I simply handed him a single sheet of paper, his final offer. Sign the divorce papers and forfeit all financial claims to Sarah. Transfer all shares, properties, and assets under his control. Sign a full confession of financial abuse to be made public and prosecuted if the agreement is violated. Leave Sarah's life. Forever. At first, he refused. He yelled, threatened, swore he would sue us. But when the investigator quietly turned on the audio recorder and Marcus produced the formal subpoena, David knew the game was over. He signed, line by line. No more protests. No more smug smiles. Just a defeated shadow of the man he once pretended to be. David was prohibited from contacting Sarah under a court order. All accounts were frozen. His shell companies were dismantled. The assets were seized and transferred back to Sarah's trust. His reputation? Obliterated. The people who once dined with him, toasted champagne at his parties, they went silent. Investors pulled out. Board members voted to remove him from every corporate position he held. He disappeared from the city in a rainy night. No goodbye, no farewell. And me? I didn't need to see him again. I didn't need to win, because he had lost completely. Sarah didn't believe me when I told her David had signed the divorce papers. She looked at me like I was joking. No way, Dad. He loves me. He wouldn't. I didn't argue. I simply handed her a file. Evidence. The insurance policy. Transaction records. The testimony of a former employee whom David had also manipulated. Sarah read, and then silence. She didn't cry. She just sat there still, like a stone in the middle of a storm. Her eyes wide, hands clutching the file as if she wanted to crush it. I quietly sat beside her. I didn't say a word. And when she turned to me, eyes red and trembling, she whispered, "I'm sorry." I held her hand. "You have nothing to be sorry for. You just loved the wrong person, and I let you go too far alone." Sarah moved back in with me, into my modest little apartment. At first, it was unfamiliar. A cramped kitchen, narrow hallways, no dishwasher, no housekeeper. But little by little, I saw her begin to smile again. The first smile's awkward, hesitant, but real. She started sleeping deeper. No more waking up at 3 a.m. with terrified eyes. She began to read again, draw, play the piano, all the things she used to love before David walked into her life. And then one day, Sarah said, "Dad, I want to go back to school. I want to help women like me." She enrolled in a law program specializing in women's rights and financial abuse prevention. 3 months later, she became a legal intern at a nonprofit supporting victims of manipulative relationships and marriages. Every week, Sarah calls me, sometimes just to ask, "Did you eat dinner yet, Dad?" Other times to send me pictures of the plants she's growing on the windowsill. We don't need to talk much, because for the first time in years, the silence between us is no longer a void. It's fullness. Every time I see her step out of the house, dressed in a sharp suit, clutching a case file, I don't need anyone to tell me I did the right thing. I know. I didn't choose to retaliate. I chose to protect. And protection, even in silence, is the highest form of love. Now, I don't keep track of David. I don't need to know where he is. He no longer matters to us. I just take my morning walks through a small park. The same one I once sat in, alone, the night I was abandoned at the train station. Now, I sit there with a cup of tea in my hand, eyes gazing quietly into the distance. But my heart is no longer empty. Beside me is a father who fulfilled his role, not through money, not through power, but through a love that knew when to stay silent and when to act. Someone once said, "When you lose everything, you know what is worth keeping." I lost my reputation, my respect, even my voice in my own family. But then I understood. I didn't need everything to start over. I only needed one thing intact: my fatherly heart. After David left, after the legal proceedings were completed, after my small apartment became a temporary home for Sarah. I found myself standing before a great void. No more enemies to fight. No more silent wars to calculate. And I asked myself, what next? The answer comes not from outside, but from the peace I feel every morning. I started taking the time to write down everything that happened. Not to brag, but so I wouldn't forget. I recorded every step. How David manipulated, how I fought back, how Sarah recovered, and most importantly, how love, even though it was quiet, overcame all cold calculation. I started going to the public library every afternoon, quietly sitting at a corner table, opening my laptop, and writing. A father, 67 years old, gray-haired, thin, living a simple life, writes the first lines of a memoir that no one thought would exist. I was once abandoned by my son-in-law at a train station. But I am still the father who holds all the keys. And this is not a story of revenge, but to wake up someone out there. I didn't expect anyone to read it. But then one day, the librarian leaned over my shoulder and whispered, "Uncle, I saw my mother like that. Could you print me a copy?" A few weeks later, I was invited to a sharing session of a group of parents whose children had been abused in marriage. I didn't mean to say anything. I just sat in the back row and listened to the sobs. But then, when the moderator asked, "Does anyone want to share how a father can help his daughter get through that?" Everyone turned. I stood up. My heart was pounding. My voice was shaking. But I told them every detail. No show. No accusation. Just the facts. And as I sat down, someone stood up and hugged me. Another father. Thank you. I have been silent for too long. My little story began to be shared. On blogs, in community workshops, on podcasts by women who were escaping emotionally abusive relationships. I won't say much. I'll just tell you about my journey of father who thought he had lost everything, but saved the most important thing. Some young people came to see me. They called me uncle or sir. They asked, "If you were my son, what would you do if he didn't dare to leave?" I don't give them answers. I give them questions to empower themselves. Does that person scare you or make you feel like yourself? If you have a daughter in the future, do you want her to love someone like that? Are you living or just existing? Sarah continues to work for the women's organization. But then, one day, he sat down at the breakfast table and said to me, "Dad, I want to do more. Not just help women, but help fathers like you. Those who don't know where to start." It suggests opening a program called Silent Shield, a community project that teaches parents how to recognize emotional abuse, control family finances, and most of all, how to act without making their children feel betrayed or violated. I said nothing, just silently held her hand. Again, I am no longer the executive of a large company. I don't have a degree in social sciences. I don't have a microphone or a stage, but I have a story and a heart. I come to the sharing sessions as a person walking through the darkness, carrying a small oil lamp. Not bright enough for the whole room, but enough for someone to see their way. At the end of every talk, I usually end with a sentence. I'm not a hero. I'm a father. And being a father, sometimes, is just being the last man standing when everyone else has given up. My story has no enemies destroyed. There is no winning ending. There was just one man sitting quietly in the park every morning, reading the newspaper, drinking tea, and smiling when he saw the message on his phone. I'm calling. Dad, there's one thing I realized after all this. The end isn't when you finish a fight, but when you truly understand why you fought in the first place. When there was no one left to confront, no more court, no more calls to lawyers, and no more sleepless nights worrying that Sarah would disappear forever. I had time to look back. And what I saw wasn't a winner. I saw a father. The real thing. I can't call what I went through a victory. No medals, no press coverage, no handshake from the government. All I do is not give up. Not giving up even though my daughter ignored me. Not giving up even though my son-in-law left me penniless. Not giving up even though people told me I should let go to ease my mind. I didn't do anything extraordinary. I just did what a father couldn't help but do. One of the most heartbreaking moments of my life wasn't being left at the train station. But it was when Sarah called David, the only one who understands me. I used to believe that father-child love is an unbreakable bond. But that thread doesn't always shine brightly. Sometimes it fades over the years, suffocated by toxic relationships and sweet talk from master manipulators. I understand. Sarah didn't turn her back on me because she hated me. She was just led astray by someone who knew how to fake love better than I knew how to show real love. I wish I asked my child more. I wish I hadn't left her to deal with everything in silence. I wish I had questioned Sarah's shyness, her quietness, and her forced smile at family gatherings. I thought my child was grown up and had a family. I shouldn't interfere. But being a father has no age limit. Being a father is knowing when to step back and when to definitely step forward. I've been waiting for the moment Sarah comes back to me. But when it actually happened, when she cried in my arms, when she looked at me with those eyes of her childhood, I wasn't happy. I feel grateful. Not because I got my daughter back, but because she didn't lose herself forever. After Sarah moved in with me, I didn't teach her how to live again. I just exist. I cook breakfast. I wait for my son to come home late so we can have dinner together. I make him a cup of hot tea when he stays up late reading. I don't ask much. I do not explain. I was just there like the floor, like the air, like a light winter blanket. Maybe that's what grown children need most. Not advice, not guidance, but it is a place to return to without feeling small. At first, I thought forgiveness was weak. I understood later. Forgiveness does not weaken me. It sets me free. I forgive Sarah for trusting the wrong person. I forgive myself for being silent for too long. And strangely enough, I forgave David too. Not because he deserves it, but because I don't want to spend a single second of the rest of my life remembering someone who doesn't deserve to exist in my memory. One day, if Sarah has a child and that child asks me, "What did Grandpa do to become a hero?" I will smile and say, "Grandpa is not a hero. He is just the father who didn't leave." And I hope that when that child grows up, he will remember that story like a little map to guide him when his heart is lost. Sarah and I didn't just come back to life. We rebuild. We started a small organization helping families detect and respond to financial abuse and emotional manipulation. We organized seminars, classes, published documents, not for money, but because too many fathers like me and too many children like Sarah have thought that silence was the safe option. We show them. Silence can kill a person slowly, but timely action can save a family. Now, every morning, I still drink tea, still walk down the same old path, still sit under the same familiar tree in the park. No more heavy heart, No more waiting for someone to understand you. I'm simply grateful that I'm still here. Grateful that my daughter still calls every week. Grateful that every meal now includes laughter. Grateful that I didn't give up in my weakest moment. If you're listening to me say this, if you have ever been abandoned, misunderstood, overlooked, thought you were useless, trust me, you are not finished yet. Because as long as you breathe, as long as you remember, as long as you love, then you can do the right thing. You don't need anyone's approval. You don't need anyone's applause. It only takes one person, just one, to get you going. And if no one needs you, be that person for yourself. I was an abandoned father. Now, I am the father my daughter leans on when she is feeling down. I used to think I was a burden. I am now a living legacy of unconditional love. Thank you. Listened until the end. Perhaps you know what it feels like to be ignored, left out, or simply not heard. But remember, you are not alone. Today's story is not just about one father. It's about the quiet strength of those who seem to have been forgotten. If you see yourself in this story, leave a comment. Even if it's just one word, I'll read it. Hit like if you believe that silence can also create justice. And if you want to accompany stories like this every week. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any ending, because each story has a lesson for you. The weeks after the trial blurred into a strange kind of calm. Not the brittle, precarious calm I'd lived with before. The kind that could be shattered by a phone call or an unexpected knock at the door. But a quieter one. The kind you almost don't trust at first. I spent mornings walking in the crisp air, my hands tucked into the pockets of my jacket, listening to the sound of my shoes on the pavement. I stopped looking over my shoulder. Stopped expecting someone to jump out from behind the next corner with another accusation or demand. And yet, even in this peace, the ghosts of what happened lingered. Sometimes, in the middle of making coffee, I'd remember Marcus at 5 years old, running into my arms after his first day of school. Or at 17, grinning behind the wheel of the beat-up Ford I'd bought him after months of extra shifts. These moments still warmed me, but they were edged now with something bittersweet. The memories hadn't changed, but I had. I could never look at them without feeling the weight of what came after. Helen noticed. "You're quieter lately," she said one afternoon as we planted spring bulbs in the garden behind my cottage. Not in a bad way. Just quieter. "I'm learning to let silence be a friend," I replied, brushing dirt from my hands. About a month later, an envelope arrived in the mail, no return address, the handwriting unfamiliar. Inside was a letter from a woman named Marlene from Ohio. She'd read the article about my case. Her words were shaky, ink blotted in places where her pen had paused too long. I thought I was losing my mind. She wrote, "My son said the same things to me yours did to you. I almost signed my farm over to him last year. After reading your story, I called my lawyer instead." I sat at my kitchen table for a long time after that, the letter spread open in front of me. It wasn't just about me anymore. It never really had been. My fight had put cracks in something bigger, something uglier, and through those cracks, light was getting in. It was Helen's idea. "You're already helping people one-on-one," she said. "Why not make it bigger?" Within weeks, I found myself standing in front of a dozen seniors at the community center, a stack of plain folders in my hands. Inside each was a simple checklist. Steps to verify property documents, how to read a lien statement, questions to ask before signing anything. "I'm not here to scare you," I told them, "but to arm you." No one should be able to trick you out of what you've built. At first, they were quiet. Then the questions came. Stories poured out. A woman whose nephew had borrowed her credit card for years. A man whose daughter convinced him to sell his land at half its value. A widow whose caregiver emptied her savings account in 6 months. I didn't have all the answers, but I listened. And sometimes, that's what mattered most. Having someone who understood without judgment. One Saturday, as I was fixing a loose hinge on my garden gate, I heard a knock at the front door. When I opened it, Emma stood there, older now, her hair pulled back in a messy bun. "I wanted to see you," she said, clutching a canvas tote bag. Inside, she showed me what she'd brought. A small, hand-painted bird figurine. "I made it in art class," she explained, avoiding my eyes. It's for you." We sat in the sunroom, and she told me about school, about how Tyler was into skateboarding now, about how their parents didn't talk about me, ever. "They said you were better off without us," she admitted, her voice cracking. I didn't press her. I just told her the truth. "You'll always have a place with me." She smiled through tears, and for the first time in years, I felt something in my chest loosen. Months later, just as life was settling into a rhythm, I got another call from the FBI agent who had first worked with me. "We're still untangling the network," he said. "Your files keep helping us connect the dots. There's going to be another wave of indictments." By then, I had no appetite for courtrooms or legal battles. But hearing that the work was still making a difference, that mattered. The storm I'd weathered was now part of a much bigger cleanup. One autumn afternoon, while sitting by the lake, a man approached me hesitantly. "Are you the one from that article?" he asked. When I nodded, he told me his story, eerily similar to mine, though his ended differently. "I signed everything," he said. "I didn't fight back. I lost my home." We talked for over an hour, and before he left, he said, "I wish I'd met you 2 years ago." I thought about that all evening. About how many people don't know they have the right to say no, or that saying no doesn't make them selfish. In early spring, I expanded the Senior Center project into a formal program called the Safeguard Initiative. We partnered with local lawyers who offered free consultations once a month. We printed guides in large print, easy to understand, no legal jargon. It didn't erase the past, but it transformed it into something useful. About a year after the trial, I received a short email from Marcus. Just 2 sentences. "I'm sorry for everything. I hope you're okay." I didn't reply, not out of spite, but because the man I'd once have written back to no longer existed. Not for me. That chapter was closed. These days, my garden blooms with the flowers Helen and I planted that first spring. I drink my coffee while watching birds land on the feeder Emma helped me build. I volunteer. I write. I live. I used to think revenge was about making someone feel the pain they caused you. But now I see it differently. The sweetest revenge is not living in that pain at all. I've learned that peace isn't something you're given. It's something you choose, over and over, even when the past claws at your heels. They may never see what they lost. But I see what I've gained. A life that's mine, honest and unshakable. And in the end, that's more than enough. That winter came early. In the small town where I lived, the cold wind rolled in with a steady drizzle, and the trees outside the porch shed their leaves until only bare branches remained. I kept my habit of waking up early, brewing a pot of coffee, and sitting on the porch watching the thin veil of mist drift over the neighbors' rooftops. I no longer turned on the TV in the mornings. No need for news or the voices of strangers talking about court cases. I chose quiet instead, listening to the ticking of the clock and the soft bubbling sound of the coffee pot. Some days, I'd pick up a book, but never turn a page. Just sit still and let my mind wander through far-off memories. One afternoon, and while sorting through old boxes in the shed, I found a small cardboard box sealed with yellowed tape. Inside were photographs from when Marcus was a boy. His first wobbly ride on a bike, our father-son fishing trip by the lake, and a picture of him on his high school graduation day. I remembered clearly how I'd patched up an old suit jacket so I could look neat, standing among the rows of proud parents, my heart full to the brim. I sat on the floor, holding each photo, and for the first time in months, I allowed myself to cry. Not because I regretted what was lost, but because I knew those moments, though now shadowed by betrayal, were still real. Close to Christmas, the landline rang. On the other end was a male voice I didn't recognize, introducing himself as the lawyer of an elderly man from another state. He said the man had read about my story in an article and wanted to invite me to speak at an online seminar about protecting seniors' assets. I hesitated. I had never imagined myself speaking to hundreds of people. But then I realized, if my story could save even one person from going through what I did, it was worth it. The seminar took place on a Saturday morning. I sat in front of the screen and spoke about warning signs, the importance of legal paperwork, and the power of trusting your instincts. When it ended, the chat box was full of thank you messages. I turned off the computer, leaned back in my chair, and for the first time, felt that I had turned my pain into something useful. In February, Emma came again, this time with Tyler. He was taller now, his voice deeper, but his eyes still bright as ever. They told me about school, about the new cat they'd adopted, and about how their mother didn't know they had come here. We baked cookies together in the kitchen, laughter echoing through my small house. When they were leaving, Tyler turned back, hugged me tightly, and whispered, "I missed you so much." I nodded, hiding the tear forming at the corner of my eye. I knew I couldn't change Marcus and Rebecca's minds, but I also knew that my love for Emma and Tyler was something they could never fully erase. I began writing more, not just journals, but short stories inspired by my life. Some were published in the local community newsletter. People started to see me not just as the old man from that famous case, but as a person with experiences, a voice, and value. On weekends, I went to the farmer's market, bought fresh fruit, chatted with familiar vendors. I learned to make apple jam, planted herbs in the backyard, and repaired the old wooden chair that had been wobbly for years. One afternoon in March, I received an envelope from Canada. Inside was a 3-page handwritten letter from an elderly woman named Margaret. She wrote that her son had repeatedly asked her to transfer ownership of her apartment, but after hearing my story on the radio, she refused. "You saved me from losing everything," she wrote. "Not just my property, but my belief in myself." I folded the letter and placed it carefully in the wooden box with my other treasured letters. One early summer evening, Helen and I went to sit by the lake. The full moon hung high, its reflection shimmering on the water like silver threads. We didn't say much, just listened to the gentle lapping of water against the dock and the crickets singing in the grass. "Since all of this happened," Helen said, "you've changed. Calmer, but stronger." I smiled. Maybe because I finally understand, no one can take away your dignity unless you let them. The following autumn, I officially started hosting a free monthly workshop at the town library, helping seniors read and understand contracts, wills, and bank documents. Each session had only about 10 people, but everyone left with a more confident look in their eyes. I never took payment. The only reward I wanted was the feeling of knowing I'd made a difference. Now, each morning I open the window, take a deep breath, and feel a lightness in my chest. I still keep Emma's letters, still leave a space in my heart for my grandchildren, but I no longer let the past dictate my present joy. I promised myself that the years I have left will not be ruled by old wounds. I will live with kindness, and let that life itself be the clearest answer to anyone who thought I would break. Because, as I've learned, the sweetest revenge is living a life they can never touch. Passing it forward. By late winter, my workshops at the library had started attracting not just seniors, but also middle-aged sons and daughters who wanted to protect their parents. One day, a man named Victor came in, mid-50s, quiet, with a sadness in his eyes I recognized immediately. After the session, he lingered. My brother's been trying to get Mom to sign over her farm. He said, she trusts him. I don't. We sat in a corner, papers spread out between us. I showed him exactly how to read the small print, what questions to ask, and how to insist on witnesses. A month later, he came back with a smile I hadn't seen before. We kept the farm, he said simply. We shook hands. But what passed between us was more than gratitude. It was the quiet bond of two people who knew what it meant to stand at the edge of loss and pull back in time. Spring came again, and with it, a knock at my door one Saturday afternoon. Emma and Tyler stood there, each holding a potted plant. "They're for your garden," Emma said, placing hers in my hands. "So you'll think of us when they grow." Tyler grinned, and we promised to come back to see them. We spent the afternoon planting them together. Emma's was a lavender bush, Tyler's a young maple tree. As we worked, they told me about school plays, soccer games, and little everyday things their parents probably never thought to share. When they left, the garden felt different. Not just greener, but alive in a way it hadn't been since before all this began. One rainy evening, I sat down at my desk and began to write a letter to Marcus. Not to accuse, not to demand, but to tell him who I was now. I wrote about the peace I'd found, the people I'd helped, the quiet joy of mornings in my garden. I told him that forgiveness wasn't about erasing what happened. It was about refusing to carry it forever. When I finished, I folded the letter and placed it in the same box as Emma's notes. I didn't send it. Some words are meant only to be written, not delivered. These days, I still wake early. I still drink my coffee slowly. I still walk to the lake and watch the light shift across the water. But everything feels different, because now, every choice is mine. Marcus and Rebecca may never understand what they lost. That's no longer my concern. The family I keep now is chosen, bound not by blood, but by honesty, respect, and care. The maple tree in the garden is already taller. The lavender sways in the wind. And each time I see them, I remember the promise I made to myself, to live kindly, to live freely, to live a life they can never take from me. That, in the end, is my sweetest revenge. If this story touched your heart, take a moment to give it a like, subscribe to the channel, and share your thoughts in the comments below. Your support helps us keep bringing you real stories of resilience, courage, and the quiet strength it takes to start over. I'd love to know, what part of this journey spoke to you the most? Let's talk about it. Thank you for staying with me until the very end of this story. If it resonated with you, please click the like button. It lets us know these stories matter. Subscribe so you won't miss the next chapter of courage, justice, and second chances. And most importantly, share your thoughts in the comments. Your words might inspire someone else who needs to hear that it's never too late to reclaim your life.